Shalom and welcome to Messiah in the Torah. And this time we have reached now the second Torah portion in the book of Leviticus. And the title in Hebrew is Tsav, which means command. And we're continuing to teach now about the sacrifices. The sacrifices in Hebrew are called korbanim or korban, which comes from a root that means to draw near. So it's actually a very, very important and also very exciting topic when we talk about the sacrifices. So let's read now from the book of Leviticus, chapter 6, and from verse 8. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall be on the hearth on the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it." Well, last week when we introduced the offerings, it is talking about those who bring the sacrifices. Well, here in this Torah portion, it is dealing with the ones who handle the sacrifices, the priests. And the Torah is giving a stricter command here, whereas it says in Leviticus chapter 1 and verse 2, it says, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering." But here it uses a stronger word. It says, command Aaron and his sons. And the reason for this stronger word here is because it's referring to a very specific sacrifice that is described in more detail in the book of Numbers, chapter 28. And I want us to go to that passage here in the Torah from Numbers 28 and verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command," there you have the same expression again here, "command the people of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food for my food offerings, my pleasing aroma, you shall be careful to offer to me at its appointed time. And you shall say to them, this is the food offering that you shall offer to the Lord, 2 male lambs, a year old without blemish, day by day as a regular offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. Also 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil. It is a regular burnt offering, which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a pleasing aroma, a food offering to the Lord. Its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb. In the holy place you shall pour out a drink offering of strong drink to the Lord. The other lamb you shall offer at twilight, like the grain offering of the morning, and like its drink offering you shall offer it as a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord." So this is talking about a very specific offering that was to be given or sacrificed in the tabernacle and in the temple every day in the morning and in the evening. And the name in the Hebrew here is the Tamid offering, which means continuous or always. It was an offering that was supposed to be the very first one in the morning. Before any other sacrifice, you had to offer this, the first lamb here, without blemish, a 1-year-old lamb without blemish in the morning as the first of the sacrifices. And then the other sacrifices, they were sacrificed on top of that first morning sacrifice. And then in the evening, as the last sacrifice, was the other lamb without blemish, a year-old lamb. And that lamb was to burn all night, to keep the fire going all night until the morning. So because this continuous offering, the Tamid offering, was on the altar all the time, it was the foundation literally for all the other sacrifices and for the temple worship as such. Now, all the sacrifices, they point to Messiah. He is the one who is the fulfillment of all of the whole Torah and everything in the Torah, of the sacrifices as well. We know that he is our Passover lamb. But not only the Passover lamb, he is also the Tamid lamb, the Tamid offering. And it's interesting when we look at the crucifixion, specifically in Mark chapter 15, we know that the crucifixion took place on the Passover because the Messiah fulfilled the Passover sacrifice as the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. But more than that, we see also the fulfillment of the Tamid offering, the Tamid sacrifice. In verse 25, it says, "And it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him." The first of the 2 Tamid sacrifices were presented in the tabernacle and in the temple in the 3rd hour at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then in the 9th hour at 3 in the afternoon was the second of the Tamid sacrifices. And we read on from verse 33, it says, "And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Yeshua cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So this is the cry that Yeshua, the Messiah, is given right as the evening sacrifice is presented in the temple. And it says later on in verse 37, "And Yeshua uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom." So in other words, he was crucified on the tree, on the cross, at 9 o'clock in the morning, when the first of the daily sacrifices were presented in the tabernacle and in the temple. And then he died in the 9th hour, when the second of the daily sacrifices, the evening sacrifice, was presented in the tabernacle and the temple. So in exact detail, we see how Yeshua fulfilled the sacrifice as the Tamid sacrifice, the always sacrifice, or the continuous sacrifice. Let's look at a passage in Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 25, because it says here, "Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives." There you have the word again, always, or continuous, Tamid. He always lives to make intercession for them. So he is the Tamid, the always sacrifice that is always interceding for us before the Father. It says in chapter 12 and verse 24, "And to Yeshua, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks," notice in the present tense here, it speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So we see here that Yeshua, the blood of Yeshua, he's like always the continuous sacrifice before the Father. The blood speaks always for us before the throne of God. Let's also see in 1 John chapter 2, verse 1, "My little children, I am writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Yeshua the Messiah, the righteous." An advocate is one who speaks on our behalf before a judge. And that is the sacrifice that he gave as the Tamid sacrifice, that blood that speaks continually before the Father, day and night. Just like that Tamid sacrifice had to be on the altar all night and then all day also as the first of the sacrifices. So whenever we approach God, we know, just like Paul said in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13, that we have been brought near through the blood of Messiah. Being brought near is the Hebrew word for sacrifice. That sacrifice of his blood, it has brought us near to God, and he is always speaking on our behalf before the Father. That's what this daily Tamid offering is a picture of. And it is so powerful. Now, we learned in last week's Torah portion that when the burnt offering was presented, the one who gave the sacrifice was to lay his hands. It said lay his hand, but it was interpreted as laying his hands, both of his hands, on the head of the animal. So and literally it says to lean on the head of the animal, so as to transfer the identity over to the sacrifice, so that sacrifice is representing the one giving the sacrifice before God. And in the same way, whenever we approach God, we can lean, trust on the Messiah as our Tamid sacrifice, that he is the one that brings us near to God always. So it is such a powerful image here. The Torah speaks about the Messiah in such detail. And when we study the picture, the shadow that is in the Torah, we will have a deeper understanding of what the Messiah has done for us. Now, let me also mention this, if we go back to the book of Numbers 28, that it was a command to all of Israel to give this sacrifice. It says in chapter 28 of Numbers and verse 2, "Command the people of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food offering for my food offerings, my pleasing aroma, you shall be careful to offer to me at its appointed time." So it was the responsibility of all the people of Israel to give this sacrifice, this Tamid sacrifice, continually to God on the altar. And this was fulfilled during the temple, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, in that the temple tax that we've also mentioned before in earlier teaching here, the temple tax, the half shekel, that had to be given for every one who was to be counted among God's people. In the days of the temple, that half shekel was used for the upkeep of the temple, but also to pay for the daily sacrifice, the Tamid sacrifice. In that way, all the people of Israel had a part in that daily sacrifice. Moreover, all the people were divided into different groups or camps who had the responsibility to be present in the temple when this sacrifice was given. So they took turns, they had shifts. Groups of people from all over Israel came at certain times to the temple to be present when the sacrifice was given, to represent all of Israel. And what they did during that time is that they were praying to God, because sacrifice and prayer is connected in different ways in the scriptures. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 8, where it says, "The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is acceptable to him." So here we see a direct correlation between sacrifice and prayer. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination, but the prayer of the upright is accepted to him. So these were times of prayer before the Lord when the daily sacrifice was given. The exact same word that is used about the feasts of the Lord in Hebrew, moadim, is used about these times of prayer connected to the daily sacrifice, the daily Tamid sacrifice. Let's look at this from first the Gospel of Luke in chapter 1. And then when I read this, I also need to mention that when this daily sacrifice, Tamid sacrifice, was given, it was also customary to burn incense before the Lord. And that's what it is referring to here in Luke chapter 1. We read from verse 8 about Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. So this took place in connection with the daily sacrifice at 9 in the morning, the 3rd hour, and at 3 in the afternoon, the 9th hour. And then look what it says in verse 10. And the whole multitude of the people, those who had been given the lot to be in the temple, representing all of Israel, it says they were praying outside at the hour of incense, it's called here. Incense is also a picture of prayer. Let my prayer be to you as the evening sacrifice, as incense before you. So it was an hour of prayer when this daily Tamid sacrifice was given in the temple. Let's look at the book of Acts, chapter 3, and see how the apostles participated in these hours of prayer in the temple. Now, Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. That was the hour when the evening daily sacrifice, continued sacrifice, was presented in the temple. It was an hour of prayer. So these hours of prayer at 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, or in the morning and in the evening, they are continually being observed even today among the Jewish people, even though there is no temple, because the prayers can always be given regardless if there is a temple or not. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 15 tells us that this was also something that the apostles taught, that prayer could be was to be given to God even if there was no sacrifice or possibility to sacrifice in a temple. It says in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 15, let's read that. It says, through him, that is through the Messiah, who is our Tamid sacrifice before the Father, then let us continually offer, there you have the word continually, having to do with Tamid, the Tamid sacrifice. Offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips that acknowledge his name. We have to remember the book of Hebrews was written to the Messianic Jews in Jerusalem who had been excluded from the temple. They could no longer participate in the temple service, but the author of the book of Hebrews says you can instead give the sacrifice from your lips, the fruit of your lips, giving thanks. And that's what the Judaism continued to do after the temple was destroyed. They have followed this apostolic really command, which is the same as within Rabbinic Judaism, that even though there is no temple, you can give the sacrifice of praise to God, fruit of lips giving thanks to his name. So let's look at another one of the sacrifices now. If we go back to the book of Leviticus and go to chapter 7, we shall read about the shlamim sacrifice in Hebrew, which is translated in different ways in different Bibles as fellowship offerings or peace offerings or even thanksgiving offering. We go to verse 11. It says, and this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offering, that one may offer to the Lord. If he offers it for a thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the thanksgiving sacrifice unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour well mixed with oil, with the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving. He shall bring his offering with loaves of leavened bread. There's a lot to say about this shlamim sacrifice, because it has to do with giving thanks to God, which brings us into fellowship with God, and also makes us whole, because the Hebrew word here, shlamim, comes from the word shalem, which means to be whole. What a lesson there is. Giving thanks, it can make us whole before God, complete. And it can make us, make us healed. We remember the lepers that were healed. They were made clean, but only one returned to give thanks, and he was a Samaritan. And Yeshua said to him that your faith has made you whole. It's the same word for the shlamim sacrifice, because he gave thanksgiving. He fell at the feet and worshiped Yeshua of gratitude and thanksgiving. Came back to give thanks, and that made him whole. Now it's interesting because it says here in the Torah that this sacrifice of thanksgiving, it had to be consumed the same day. It could not be left till the following day. And that means practically that the one who sacrificed this burnt offering, it was very difficult for him to eat the whole sacrifice by himself. He had to share it with others. And when he shared the sacrifice, the meat from the sacrifice with other people, it was an opportunity for him to tell the people why he was given this thanksgiving sacrifice. And that gave more praise to God. Here, have something, share with me. And the other person would ask, why? Well, because God has done so and so for me. That's why I want to give this sacrifice and share it with you. And when we tell others what God has done, it gives praise to God. And that's the lesson here in the Thanksgiving offering sacrifice that had to be eaten the same day. We have to share with others what God has done in our lives. Remember the demon-possessed man that was healed by Yeshua, Jesus, and he wanted to follow him, but the Messiah told him instead, go back and tell your family and your friends the great things that God has done for you. That gave praise to God by him sharing that experience. One psalm that was sung in the temple together with the thanksgiving sacrifice, we find in Psalm 107, a psalm written by David. Let's look at that. This is a song that was sung as the sacrifice was given. From verse 1, "O give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." Can you imagine the one giving the sacrifice now? Part of it is burning on the altar, the rest is being consumed, shared. It's a festival meal, and then they sing this praise to God. "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble." And then it mentions 4 different difficulties here in this psalm. When God has delivered us from those difficulties, there was a command to give a thanksgiving sacrifice in the temple. The first is we see in verse 4, "Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted with him. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress." So here it is somebody who has survived a journey through a desert or hard circumstances, when he came safely to his destination, he was obligated to give this thanksgiving sacrifice to the Lord. The second instance is from verse 10. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons. Well, God set them free. That was a command to give a sacrifice of thanksgiving, being freed from prison. The third instance is after a serious illness. It says in verse 17, some were fools through their sinful ways. Because of their iniquities suffered affliction. They loathed any kind of food. In other words, they were sick. So when they were healed, they were obligated to give this thanksgiving sacrifice. Finally, it says those who had journeyed on the sea. It says from verse 23, some went down to the sea in ships doing business in the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. So when they were saved from this, they had to give a thanksgiving sacrifice. Never forget to give thanks to God when he has heard your prayer, he has delivered you and set you free, he has healed you, or he has kept you safe on a journey. Remember to give an offer of thanksgiving. That brings you close to God, fellowship with him, and makes you whole. I have to end. The time is out. Thank you for being with me. God bless you. And you can go to our website, thewatchman.org, and download, subscribe to our written commentaries if you desire more of the teaching from the Torah. Shalom from Jerusalem.